The United States Revolution, the American Revolution, added something. That the bringing in capitalism, unleashing the colonial economy from its fealty to the British Empire, would bring us democracy. We would get democracy. And you know, in America, democracy is our religion. We invoke it 10 times an hour, or else we feel something's missing in our lives. So let's talk about democracy and whether capitalism has delivered it or not. Now you see the next step of the criticism. We've talked about inequality, now we're going to do democracy. All right, by democracy, I need to tell you what I mean. It's when a decision affects you, democracy insists you must have a role in making that decision. You know, we get to vote on the mayor of our town because we know the mayor makes decisions that affect us as residents, and so we have some power, at least to vote for the fellow or the woman or not. Like we vote for a senator or president or anything else. So in our neighborhoods, we understand that democracy means if we're affected by a decision, we have power over it. We participate in the decisions that affect our lives. Okay, let's go now. We're going to get up in the morning like most of us do on a weekday, 5 out of the 7 days. We're going to brush our teeth, put pomade in our hair, and go to work. And we're going to cross the threshold into the workplace. The factory, the office, the store, it doesn't matter. And now let's follow what happens there over the best hours of the day, the 8 hours of the day, 5 out of the 7 days of the week. Somebody tells you where to stand, where to sit, what to do, with what equipment, in what way, for how long. And at the end of the day, when you've poured your brains and muscles into producing something, you're told to go home and leave what you produced there. And if you take it with you, people in blue uniforms come to your house and they hurt you. Which you know, which is why you don't take except the occasional stapler. Right? Right? There's no democracy in the workplace in capitalism. There never was. What are you talking? You're being told by what? Typical American works for a corporation. That's what does most of the business. Corporations are run by a group of people called a board of directors. They typically have somewhere between 12 and 20 people on them. They're elected by the shareholders. And since 10% of Americans own 80% of the shares, a tiny number of Americans selects the board of directors. You, as the employee, don't. You don't have any power over the people that will decide what you produce, how you produce, where you produce, and what is done with the fruits of your labor. You're just a drone. And at the end of the day, you're to go home, stuff yourself with pizza and beer, and come back tomorrow and do it all again. Something you've noticed which is making you feel that your job is a burden, not something you look forward to. There's no democracy in the workplace, and there never was. That's not how capitalism is working. Never did. Well, let's see now. Where do adults spend most of their waking life? At work. If you believe in democracy, that's the first place you would have instituted it. But you don't, and you never did, and you don't even question it. The United States is bringing democracy to other countries. You can't bring what you don't have. What are you talking about? This country has made a fetish of democracy in the community, in the residents. But in large part, it's a guilty conscience because it's missing from the work life. And what possible excuse is there? Either you believe in democracy or you don't. And if you think there's a moral principle that people affected by a decision have to be able to participate, well, here's a decision at the workplace. You're fired. Here's another one. Your salary's being cut. Here's another one. You're going to work the 4 a.m. to 9 shift from now on. You know, many of you have gone through this. You're free to go and do it again with another employer. Come on. There's no democracy in the workplace. There never was. Capitalism didn't bring us democracy. Nothing like it. And when you hear some pompous jackass tell you about capitalism and democracy, remember, it's a jackass. I'm trying to be fair here. Okay. Next, stability. A lot of us put some stock in stability. We like to know that we can go home to our house at the end of the day and it'll be there. And maybe our spouse and our children and our friends and we want some stability. We want to know the job is there and we can count on the income and the work and the life. We can, stable. A lot of people like stable. You know, occasionally something wild, but stable. Let's see, how does capitalism do on stability? Badly, or really badly. Now, for those of you who don't know, every place that capitalism has ever gone, ever settled in as a dominant economy, again, from England at the end of the 18th century, all across now to be the dominant system in the world, it has an economic downturn, nice phrase, every 4 to 7 years. Let me do that again. Every 4 to 7 years, this economic system tanks. Now, sometimes it's awful, like the one in 1929 to 41, or the one since 2008. Those have been doozies. But for those of you who don't know, between the end of the 1930s collapse, from 1941 until this new one in 2008, there were 11 other economic downturns. For those of you that are interested, there's a government agency called the National Bureau of Economic Research, which measures all that and keeps the records. Every president since Roosevelt has said, if you just do my policy, the current clown is doing it too, like all the presidents. They promised, if you just do my policy, it will get us out of this bad economic time. Why is each one saying it? Because each one is president at one of those, because we have them every 4 to 7 years. If you follow my policy, not only will we get out of this downturn, but we will not give that kind of problem to our children. Every president has promised it. No president has ever delivered it. At the end of the Great Depression, we were told that we had learned how to manage our economy better. We had reforms, we had regulations, and they would make sure we didn't have this again. Well, in 2008, you could see how deeply they understood their situation. Wishful thinking didn't work out. The largest bank in the United States today is the J.P. Morgan Chase Bank in New York City. Last week, they issued their regular reports. I'm one of those kind of people who reads that stuff. And they predicted the next downturn will be early in the year 2020. That's less than a year and a half from now. Welcome to capitalism's instability. If you lived with a roommate as unstable as capitalism, you would have moved out long ago. But you accept it. In fact, many people think it's somehow natural. It's sort of like the rain. You know, how many of us stand there screaming at the sky saying, you know, it's horrible, don't rain on us. We don't do that. We accept it. That's the way it is. And that's what people do with this unstable system. Wow. Now the last one. I could go on all night, but I won't. The last problem with capitalism. It's something Marx called uneven development. And if you've never thought about this, it's a reason to read Marx. Here was his argument. A system could be designed that had the following logic to economic development. You don't concentrate all the development in one place. You spread it out. You try to develop your new industry where people need jobs and there isn't already an industry. You try to evenly develop the world. And here's why you want to do that. If you make some areas real rich and other ones real poor, guess what? this is really complicated. The poor are envious. The poor are jealous. The poor are angry. And the poor, this is for today, move. Guess where they move to? Well, where would you move to? Where the rich people are, because the jobs are nice and they keep the streets clean. We complain about migration. Hello? The way to deal with migration is not walls and cops. We've tried that for centuries. It doesn't work. If you don't want people to rip themselves out of the cultures and neighborhoods and families that they want to stay with and go thousands of miles somewhere else, you know, like those people in that caravan in Honduras and in Mexico now, to a country that they know doesn't really want them, where they don't speak the language, and God knows what will happen to them. If you don't want that to happen, don't make uneven development. Don't develop one part this way and another one dirt poor. But that's how capitalism always works. It takes, even when it takes a poor area and builds it up, you can be damn sure that not far away there's a good area that's being smashed down. On the edge of New York, Harlem, which used to be a really beaten down poor place, is now a thriving gentrification from poor upscale. But then we have Detroit or Cleveland, or my favorite, if you've never been there, Camden, New Jersey. These are places that once were quite prosperous and are now disaster. For those of you not familiar, Detroit, 1970, population 2 million people. It was the place presidents took visiting dignitaries. What a successful capitalism, the automobile industry, everybody had a job. Even African Americans coming from the South got jobs in the auto plants. It was success. 1970, fast forward to today. Population of Detroit today, 680,000 people. Do you understand? The majority of the people of that city were driven out because there's no work, there are no jobs. A third of the housing stock in Detroit today sits there, empty, burned. They recently had a problem because the city has no money since the houses are gone, the taxpayers are gone, so it laid off all the dog wardens. Meanwhile, all these people leaving Detroit with no money said goodbye to the pooch, got in the car and left the dog. Okay, the dog and no wardens. Dogs, because I'm very polite, I will not discuss what dogs do, but they do something and that makes more dogs. And these more dogs have no warden. So Detroit, 3 years ago, had a serious problem, ready, in America, of wild dogs attacking people. That's capitalism. Gentrification in Harlem, smash Detroit. Inequality, no democracy, uneven development, and instability. You want to tell me why you're in favor of this kind of system? What are you doing? Why would you do that? What possesses you? Some of you know of a website called YouGov. They did a poll not too long ago. And they asked Americans 18 to 29, do you feel favorable to capitalism? And then they asked the same question, do you feel favorable to socialism? On the question of favorable to capitalism, they had a result, 2015, 39% said they were. By 2018, this year, it had fallen to 30%. Based on what we know about the Bernie Sanders campaign and others, the percentage of Americans who are favorable to socialism probably higher. That's the country you live in. It's not what you read in USA Today, but it's the country you live in. I didn't make any of this up. I wouldn't dare. So what's going on? Now this is the hardest part, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm not an alarmist, I'm really not. I think capitalism has had an enormous run, has enormous powers of revitalizing itself, even when it stumbles as badly as it usually does. And so I'm going to tell you, I mean, you don't know me personally, but take my word for it. I now think it's over. And I've never thought that before. I think we're done. And I think you better think about that, because I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think so. The level of problems we have now as an economy is nothing like I've ever seen before. A personal note. One of the reasons a Marxian economist like me can get jobs. I taught at Yale, I taught at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst most of my adult life. I teach now at something called the New School University, which is a major institution in downtown New York City, is because I went to the right schools. This is America. And after all that conversation about democracy, if you go to the right schools, things happen to you that do not happen to you if you do not. So let me tell you about this one. I went to Harvard as an undergraduate. When I graduated, I went to Stanford. I got my master's degree. Then I left there and I went to Yale, where I got 2 more master's degrees and my PhD. You get the picture? I'm a poster boy for American elite education. At Yale, in my class, when I was getting my PhD, one of my classmates was a young lady named Janet Yellen. She became the head of the Federal Reserve. Get the picture? We all know each other. It's a small group. I get together with them, since I live in Manhattan, a few blocks from Wall Street. And when we get together, and I was mentioning this out to someone in the hall, we have a very peculiar conversation. We don't agree because they're right-wingers and center and lefties like me, and we don't agree on how the America got into the situation it's in, and we do not agree on how to get out of it. I'm going to tell you how we can get out of it, but we don't agree on that. But here's what we all agree to, and we're all shocked. We look at each other across coffee or a drink, and we say, this is the worst condition of the American economy in our lifetimes. We all agree. You've got to think about this, not because of some ideological commitment. It's your life that's going to be shaped by all of this. The level of debt taken on by corporations is unprecedented in America. Because of the collapse in 2008, as I hope most of you know, the Federal Reserve brought the interest rates down to near zero, and for some periods of time actually below zero. Below zero means that the government pays banks to borrow from the government. You borrow $1,000 and you give back less than that at the end of the year. That's how desperate they were to keep the economy going. But if you make borrowed money cheap like that, every capitalist who dreams that this latest project will work, that this latest investment will work, even when it's not looking good, borrows free money to try to make it work. That's what they did. They borrowed loads of money. And now for projects that aren't working out, so they can't pay it back. This should sound familiar to you. It's called the subprime industrial loan. Uh-oh. Yeah. And you know what's making it worse? Capitalists are always nervous. In the nature of capitalism, you got to invest now, hire workers, build a factory, but you won't see the output for a year or 2 or 3, which means you've got to commit money now for something that's uncertain, the future. Nobody knows what the future is going to be. Uncertainty is a very dangerous thing in capitalism. Why? Because all of us depend on what a tiny minority decide to do. Will they invest or won't they? By the way, another footnote about democracy. 200 corporations make a decision not to invest. We all have a recession. We don't have anything to say about it. They make the decision. We live with the results. What is our power over that decision? Zilch. Again, if I had time, the national anthem. But I won't, because we don't have the time. So uncertainty breeds hesitance to invest. Terrible. You know what's causing a lot of uncertainty now? Mr. Trump's trade wars We have no idea. What are the Chinese going to do? What are they already going to do? What are the other countries going to do? What are the Europeans going to do? What are the Canadians and Mexicans going to do? Everybody's going to retaliate. The idea we're all going to lie down and do what the United States wants. Only Fox News reasons like that. The world does not work like that. Doesn't have to and will not. That uncertainty is making the already difficult problem worse. This is a capitalism that has also taken a remarkable step that ought to offend all of you. I don't know how many of you know. Germany, the most successful capitalist story since the great crash of 2008. Germany, last year, made all tuition at all colleges in the country free, zero. Not just for German citizens, for everybody. You can go to Germany, there'll be no tuition. The United States, in contrast, is loading up a generation of young people with a level of debt that they know they can never pay. That's crazy. We are not a crazy people, but we're acting crazy, and that's a clue. Every economist I know, left-wing or right-winger, says the future of the American economy depends on the quality and the quantity of the young people going to college. That's our trained labor force. Overwhelmingly, in case you're not familiar with it, 3/4 of our college graduates come out of public school, not private school, public school. We are savaging our public school. Every state in the union is cutting the money, and you're all loading up on debt. So you can't dare take a course you might love to because you know your debts. You got to get a job quick and get some money and start paying it down. What kind of life is this? Is this necessary? No. There are 8 countries in Europe doing what Germany is doing. What's the matter with this country? Why do you permit it? Why do you permit this? It's loading you up with a debt for the rest of your life and promises to punish you if you don't pay on time. You couldn't do this in Europe. The streets would not be yours anymore if you did. What's going on? Smart people, the American people, cutting their own educational programs left and right. My students, my PhD students, they can't get jobs as professors. They're all adjuncts. Adjunct is a cheap word in which you get a person to work very hard for very little money, which is why it's being done. But they can't read books, they can't research. They're running around from one school to another, making do with crappy salaries to substitute for what they used to hire in the way of professors. What? You're damaging the quality of the education. You're loading young people up with debts that create anxiety that interferes with their education. You don't need a PhD to understand this is bad for our future. Why would we do that? Because the system is busted. The rest is fairy tales. And they're not nice fairies.
Once upon a time, we were told that only a king, or a czar, or an emperor, had the competence to govern us politically. We eventually cut off their heads.